When strangers wearing fake uniforms stepped onto Joseph Reynolds' ranch, they expected an easy victory, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. What do you think would happen when you tried to outsmart a man trained for the impossible? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and stick around to see how this incredible story unfolds. When Joseph Reynolds swung open the heavy barn door, he moved like a man who had spent his life knowing every inch of terrain he stood on. His boots crunched over the dry, hard-packed earth, carrying a weight honed by decades of discipline. The ranch was quiet, but Joseph was never the type to mistake silence for safety. His hand brushed the rifle hanging above the workbench out of habit, not necessity. Or so he thought. He was halfway through adjusting the cinch on his mare when the sound of tires grinding against gravel caught his attention. He didn't flinch, didn't stop his work. He just listened. 2 vehicles, heavy engines, wrong rhythm for local traffic. Strangers who either didn't know or didn't care whose land they were on. Joseph straightened, wiping his hands on an old cloth, and walked with deliberate calm to the edge of the barn. His eyes narrowed, tracking a green SUV and a battered black truck pulling up to the edge of his property line. 3 men climbed out, each wearing khaki uniforms with fake ranger patches sewn half-heartedly onto their sleeves. Cheap badges flashed under the hot sun. Joseph didn't move, didn't greet them. He simply observed. The tallest of the 3, broad-shouldered with a rough beard and mirrored sunglasses, took the lead. His name, if Joseph had to guess based on the cocky strut alone, would be Travis Boone. Boone's kind always led the charge, the loudmouth, the poker player, the one who thought confidence could hide incompetence. Behind him was a wiry man with a clipboard, Eddie Sharp, most likely the talker, and a third, heavier-set man in a ball cap pulled low, Colt Ramsey. Muscle without a plan. Boone cupped his hands around his mouth and hollered, "Morning, sir. Park rangers. We just need a quick inspection of your property. Nothing to worry about." Joseph let the words hang in the air, tasted them for their falsehoods. Park rangers didn't work private ranch inspections. Not without a formal request, and certainly not dressed like a Halloween version of the real thing. He finally stepped out of the barn, the sun flashing briefly off the old Navy trident pin still tucked into the leather band of his hat. A small piece of history, unseen by most but never forgotten by him. "You boys sure you're on the right property?" Joseph's voice was steady, neutral. His posture said otherwise. Easy, but ready. Boone smiled, showing a row of crooked teeth. "Absolutely, sir. Routine compliance check. Some reports about unauthorized structures and illegal water use." Joseph tilted his head slightly. That's so. He knew every inch of his land, every pipeline and fence post, and there wasn't a violation among them. Eddie Sharp stepped forward, shuffling some papers. "We just need you to sign this here to acknowledge the inspection. Legal requirement." Joseph didn't reach for the clipboard. Instead, he studied the official forms. Fonts mismatched, government seals printed in muddy ink, typos glaring like flares. His gut tightened, but his face didn't change. "Do you mind telling me what agency sent you out?" Joseph asked, still polite, still deadly calm. Colt Ramsey shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Boone, who covered it with a laugh. "Just following orders, sir. You know how it is. Bureaucracy." Joseph nodded slowly. He knew exactly how it was. He also knew these men weren't government. They were predators, circling what they thought was wounded prey. The moment stretched tight between them, humming like a live wire. Boone's smile faltered just a hair. Joseph caught it. From the corner of his eye, Joseph spotted movement at the tree line. His neighbor Tommy Hendricks riding up on his four-wheeler, a shotgun racked across the back. Good. Not because Joseph needed help, but because a second pair of eyes meant witnesses. Boone caught Tommy's approach and cleared his throat. "Tell you what," he said quickly, "let's make this easy. You let us do a quick walk-through, no need to get anyone else involved, keeps it simple." Joseph crossed his arms over his chest. "Simple's good. Real simple. You got a warrant?" Silence. Boone's face flushed, a deep red crawling up from his collar. Eddie tried to recover. "We don't need one for preliminary inspections." Joseph cut him off with a small shake of his head. "That's where you're wrong. Fourth Amendment. No one steps foot on my land without a warrant or an invitation. You got neither." The heaviness in the air thickened. Tommy pulled up beside him, tipping his ball cap back just enough to show a grim smile. "Problem here, Joe?" Joseph kept his eyes on the men. "Not yet," he said, "but it's working real hard to become one." Boone flexed his fingers at his side, glancing nervously between Joseph and Tommy. For the first time, the three fake rangers looked less like officials and more like what they truly were, amateurs playing a dangerous game. Joseph let the silence press down on them, suffocating and wide. He let it twist the air around them, the way he had learned long ago in places far crueler than this dusty stretch of New Mexico. People make mistakes under pressure. He was waiting for theirs. It was Colt Ramsey who cracked first. "Look, man, we don't want trouble," he blurted, voice too loud, too fast. "We're just—" Boone shot him a glare, but it was too late. Joseph smiled for the first time, a small, tight thing that didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah," he said softly, "I can tell." Without raising his voice, Joseph turned and walked toward the house. "You boys have about 15 seconds to be back in those vehicles," he called over his shoulder. "After that, I'm calling the sheriff." Boone swore under his breath, slamming the clipboard against his thigh. Eddie hesitated a second too long, but Boone grabbed his arm and yanked him toward the SUV. Colt stumbled after them, tossing a last, fearful look at Joseph. Engines roared. Tires kicked up angry clouds of dust. Within moments, the vehicles were shrinking down the drive, battered and beaten by their own failure. Joseph watched them go, then turned to Tommy. "Get word to Amanda? Tell her to send a deputy." Tommy nodded. "You think they'll come back?" Joseph scanned the horizon, where the dust still lingered like a wound across the blue sky. "They'll be back," he said. "Amateurs always make the same mistake." He tipped his hat low against the glare and turned back toward the barn, already thinking 2 moves ahead. The war was about to come to Clearwater County, and Joseph Reynolds was ready. The sheriff's truck rolled up 2 hours later, a soft cloud of dust following in its wake. Sheriff Amanda Brooks stepped out, her boots hitting the ground with a quiet confidence that only came from years of navigating the uneasy balance between ranchers and the fringes of lawless wanderers who thought the desert was a place without rules. She wasn't wearing a hat today, and the lines on her face were deeper than Joseph remembered, drawn tighter from a long season of stress and sleepless nights. Joseph met her at the fence, arms resting on the top rail like he had all the time in the world. Amanda's sharp brown eyes scanned him first, then the land behind him, and finally settled on the empty gravel driveway where the fake rangers had stood just hours ago. Tommy had given her the basics over the radio, but Joseph knew she was here for the deeper cut of the story, the one you couldn't transmit with a few scratchy words and static bursts. Out here, the old ways mattered. You looked a man in the eye when trouble was brewing. "You sure about what you saw?" Amanda asked without preamble. Joseph gave a small shrug, the kind that didn't deny or confirm, just existed as an inevitable fact. "Fake badges, fake citations, no warrant. Trying real hard to sound official, but they couldn't back it up." Amanda nodded, pulling a small notebook from her back pocket. She flipped it open, her pen ready, but didn't write anything yet. "Descriptions?" she asked. From the loudmouth, about 6'3", beard, mirror sunglasses, called himself a ranger, but didn't even know the difference between a riparian easement and a water rights claim when I asked. Amanda's mouth twitched at that, the barest hint of a smile. She knew Joseph's style. Slow, steady pressure until the lies collapsed under their own weight. "The other two?" she prompted. Skinny one with a clipboard, looked like he learned everything he knows about government work from reruns of Chips. "Last guy was bigger, heavier, ball cap pulled low. Muscle, but nervous." Amanda finally wrote something down, quick shorthand Joseph couldn't read from the angle he stood. Vehicles. A green SUV, black pickup, out-of-state plates, no forestry department markings. Amanda grunted, the sound low in her throat. She closed the notebook and tucked it away. "This ain't the first report I've had of scams popping up around the county," she admitted. "But it's the first one where they had the stones to walk onto a veteran's land and start throwing threats." Joseph pushed off the fence and stood straighter, the small movement loaded with an energy Amanda didn't miss. "Thought they could pick an easy target," Joseph said. "Guess they were wrong." Amanda smiled thinly. "They'll find out a whole lot about regret before this is over." She jerked her chin toward the house. "Mind if I come in, get a better rundown?" Joseph gestured for her to follow, and together they crossed the dry yard to the porch. Inside, the air was cooler, the ceiling fans doing lazy circles that barely stirred the heat but made the place feel lived in, protected. Joseph poured 2 glasses of water from the jug sitting on the counter without asking, setting one in front of Amanda before sliding into a chair opposite her at the kitchen table. He gave her every detail he could remember. Mannerisms, wording, the fake documents Eddie Sharp had tried to shove under his nose. Amanda asked a few pointed questions, but mostly she just listened, absorbing it all like a seasoned interrogator without ever making it feel like an interrogation. When Joseph finished, Amanda leaned back and let out a breath. "They're getting bolder," she said. "Used to be they'd stick to phone scams, target widows, retirees, anyone isolated. Never face-to-face like this." Joseph's jaw tightened. "They're testing the fences, seeing how close they can get before somebody bites back." Amanda tapped her fingers against the side of her glass, thinking. "I'll run the plate numbers. Probably stolen, but if we're lucky, they got lazy. Maybe they didn't swap them out yet." Joseph nodded, but his mind was already moving ahead, game planning. He wasn't the kind of man to leave all the work to the sheriff, good as she was. Defense meant layers. It meant being 2 steps ahead when they thought you were standing still. He leaned forward slightly. "If they come back," he said quietly, "I won't just be calling you." Amanda studied him for a long moment, her face unreadable. "You planning to escalate, Joe?" she asked, voice low. Joseph smiled then, but it was not a friendly thing. It was a smile sharpened by years in foreign places where threats weren't abstract legal concepts. They were immediate, final, and lethal. "Planning to be ready," he said simply. Amanda accepted that. She didn't lecture him, didn't tell him to stay inside the lines. She knew better. Out here, the lines blurred fast when survival was on the table. She stood, adjusting her belt. "I'll have a deputy swing by the next few days, keep a visible presence. Might spook 'em if they're watching." Joseph rose too, following her to the door. "Appreciate it." Amanda hesitated with her hand on the knob. "Joe, watch yourself. These types? Desperate, stupid, makes 'em dangerous." Joseph only nodded. He didn't need the warning. He had lived with dangerous men before. He had been one. Amanda left in a cloud of dust and good intentions, her taillights vanishing down the long road that led back to town. Joseph stood there for a long time, staring at the horizon. The land around him stretched out wide and flat, deceptively empty, but he knew better. He could feel it in the air, the way predators sometimes circled before they pounced, testing the herd. He turned back inside and opened a heavy, battered locker tucked against the far wall of his living room. Inside were the tools of another life, tools he'd promised himself he would never need again. Joseph's fingers brushed over the gear with a quiet reverence. There was no hesitation in his movements as he selected what he needed: the small satellite phone, a well-oiled Sig Sauer, a lightweight tactical vest stripped of patches but still smelling faintly of desert dust and sweat and long nights under hostile stars. He worked methodically, moving through the house like a man preparing for siege, checking locks, sightlines, fallback positions. The ranch had always been built for defense without looking like it. Outbuildings positioned to create natural choke points, windows reinforced discreetly, a few hidden cameras disguised as old floodlights. He wasn't expecting a firefight. He wasn't craving one. But he wasn't about to be anyone's victim either. As the last sliver of daylight faded, Joseph stood on the porch again, rifle slung casually across his chest, watching the stars blink into existence one by one. Out here, under this vast stretch of sky, a man could believe he was alone, safe, forgotten. But Joseph Reynolds knew better. He could feel the wrongness out there still, just beyond the reach of the porch lights, just beyond the comforting buzz of insects and the distant lowing of cattle. He knew it wouldn't be long before the fake rangers, or whoever sent them, came back, thinking the darkness was cover enough. He would be ready. He was always ready. The next morning broke without ceremony. Joseph Reynolds was already moving before the first dull rays of sunlight cracked over the distant hills. Sleep had visited him in short, restless bursts, his body never fully giving itself over to rest. Old instincts had a way of reawakening when needed. The muscle memory of alertness etched into his very marrow. He finished tightening the last bolt on a motion sensor hidden behind a weather-beaten fence post. Standing, he surveyed the line of defenses he had built into the land, defenses no one who casually glanced around would ever notice. To the outsider, his ranch looked like any other aging piece of American grit. All wide-open fields, weathered wood, and sun-scorched fences. To Joseph, it was now a fortress. In his distance, he spotted Tommy's four-wheeler kicking up a trail of dust as it approached. Joseph waited, arms crossed, as Tommy pulled up and killed the engine. Tommy dismounted with a grunt, removing his cap and wiping a sleeve across his forehead. "Got word out to the boys," Tommy said. "A few of 'em will be hanging close today, just in case you need extra eyes. Sheriff's got a patrol doing loops too, but—" He trailed off, his meaning clear. Loops didn't stop a determined enemy. Not out here. Joseph gave a single nod of appreciation. "Good. Won't need to call them unless it gets loud." Tommy glanced around, noting the subtle changes Joseph had made overnight. He let out a low whistle. "Looks like you're setting up for something." Joseph's mouth twitched upward. "Just encouraging good manners." Tommy chuckled, but his eyes were serious. "You think they're coming back today?" Joseph didn't answer right away. Instead, he scanned the perimeter, feeling the way the land breathed, the way it whispered. Every veteran learned to trust that sixth sense, the one that wasn't quite sight or sound, but something deeper, older. "They'll come," Joseph said finally. "They think they scared me. They're counting on weakness." Tommy shifted uncomfortably. "Well, they picked the wrong man for that." Joseph said nothing. Inside, a cold certainty settled into place. Tommy left shortly after, heading off to set up a lookout on the ridge. Joseph finished his final checks, adjusted the tilt of a few cameras, repositioned a false fuel barrel to create a better visual barrier. Every move calculated, every move patient. It was a little past noon when the first hint of trouble arrived. Not through noise or violence, but through absence. The birds, which had been chirping busily all morning, fell silent. Joseph, sitting at his kitchen table cleaning a rifle, noticed the change immediately. He stood, moving to the window, careful to stay out of sight. Through the sheer curtain, he spotted it. A dust trail winding its way toward his ranch from the south. Smaller than yesterday, more deliberate. Joseph's heartbeat didn't quicken. His breathing didn't change. He simply picked up the rifle and slung it across his shoulder, moving with quiet purpose through the house. He didn't barricade the doors. He didn't rush outside. He waited. The black pickup from the day before rolled up the driveway and stopped 30 yards short of the house. Only 2 men climbed out this time, Boone and Colt Ramsey. No Eddie Sharp. Either he'd gotten cold feet, or he was lurking somewhere else, waiting. Boone wore the same cheap uniform, but this time his shirt was untucked, his badge missing altogether. He didn't bother pretending anymore. The mask had slipped. Joseph stepped out onto the porch, hands empty, posture relaxed. Boone called out, voice heavier with anger than fake authority this time. "We just want to talk, Reynolds." Joseph leaned against the porch post, calm as still water. "Talking's free. Yelling's extra." Boone scowled, glancing around the property like he expected to see snipers on every roof. Maybe he wasn't too far off. "You think you're real smart," Boone said. "Getting the law involved, getting your little buddies stirred up." Joseph tilted his head slightly. "You're trespassing." Boone ignored him, pacing a few steps closer. "You're poking around in things you don't understand. This land, these homes out here, they ain't gonna stay yours for long, old man. There's bigger deals going on. You're just a roadblock." Joseph's face remained unreadable. "Then you better be real careful how you try to move me." Boone sneered. "You think some worn-out old SEAL scares me? You ain't in Afghanistan anymore. Ain't no team backing you up." Joseph pushed off the post, moving slowly down the porch steps. Each step was measured, steady. He wasn't posturing, he wasn't baiting, he was warning. "You're right," Joseph said, his voice low. "I'm not overseas anymore." He reached the last step and stopped, his boots planted firm in the dirt. "I'm home, and that makes me a whole lot more dangerous." For a moment, Boone hesitated. Joseph could see it, the crack in his bravado, but Colt, dense and jittery, wasn't wired for subtlety. He reached into his waistband and pulled a cheap handgun, leveling it toward Joseph with a trembling hand. Joseph didn't move, didn't flinch. "Put it down," he said, voice cutting through the air like a blade. Colt's hands shook harder, but he didn't lower the weapon. Behind him, Boone cursed under his breath, glancing nervously back toward the truck. From the tree line, a sharp, unmistakable sound cracked across the open field. The metallic cha-chunk of a shotgun being racked. Tommy Hendricks stepped out of the shadow of an old oak, the sun glinting off the barrel of his 12-gauge. Further out, another figure rose from the tall grass. Sheriff Amanda Brooks, hand resting lightly on the butt of her holstered pistol, eyes steady. Boone froze. Colt froze. The world itself seemed to freeze. "You boys really want to dance?" Amanda called out, her voice clear and sharp. "Because I guarantee you won't like the music." Colt's arms sagged, the gun drooping toward the ground. Boone hissed at him under his breath, but it was too late. The sheriff was already striding toward them, badge gleaming in the noon light. Joseph didn't smile. He didn't need to. He just stood there, a pillar of silent defiance. As the trap he had set snapped shut around the would-be predators, Amanda reached Boone first, her handcuffs flashing in the sun. "Drop to your knees, hands on your head." Boone snarled but complied, the weight of real authority finally crashing down on him. Colt followed the pistol, and raising trembling hands into the air. Joseph stepped back onto the porch, watching as Amanda and Tommy secured the two men. He said nothing. There was nothing left to say. When Amanda marched Boone past him toward the patrol car, Boone twisted his head, spitting words like venom. "This ain't over, Reynolds. You don't know who you're messing with." Joseph didn't blink. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," he said quietly. "Weak men who think fear's the same thing as power." Boone glared at him, but Amanda shoved him forward before he could open his mouth again. The ranch returned to its quiet hum, the air slowly loosening its tight hold. Tommy gave Joseph a two-fingered salute before climbing back onto his four-wheeler, whistling a lazy tune. Amanda loaded the arrested men into the back of her truck, tossing a nod of respect toward Joseph before pulling away down the long drive. Dahmer and Joseph stood on the porch until the dust trail disappeared over the horizon. Only then did he let out a slow breath, feeling the tension ease from his muscles, feeling the sun warm his skin. The first battle was over, but Joseph Reynolds knew the war was just beginning. That evening, after the sheriff's taillights faded from view and the dust settled once again over Clearwater County, Joseph Reynolds sat at his kitchen table, a worn notepad open in front of him. The house was silent, except for the slow ticking of the clock on the wall. each second tapping out a rhythm that matched the methodical turning of Joseph's mind. He wasn't the type to celebrate early. Boone and Colt being hauled off was good, but it wasn't the end. No, it was only the start. Men like them didn't organize themselves. They didn't wake up one morning and decide to run rural extortion scams in broad daylight. Someone higher up had set this in motion, and Joseph knew the real fight was still buried underneath layers of lies, waiting for him to dig it out. But he scribbled down what he knew: the fake uniforms, the bad paperwork, the attempt to provoke him into reacting violently. They hadn't been here to scare him. They had been here to bait him, to push him into making a mistake, something that could be used against him later. Some bigger hand was playing the game. The question was, who? Joseph stood and grabbed his keys from the hook near the door. The sun was dipping low behind the hills, bleeding the sky in shades of fire and ash. It would be dark soon, but he had no intention of sleeping. Not yet. He drove his old F-150 toward town, the engine rumbling low as the ranch lights disappeared in the rearview mirror. Clearwater County wasn't much: a scatter of buildings, a two-pump gas station, a diner, a hardware store that doubled as a gossip hub. But Joseph wasn't going for conversation. He was going to see someone who dealt in a different kind of information. The sheriff's station was closed for the night except for the on-duty deputy, but a light still burned at the back of the hollow horn, the local bar tucked off Main Street where every real story eventually surfaced if you waited long enough. Joseph pulled into the gravel lot, parked, and stepped inside. The place smelled of old wood, spilled beer, and fried food. A few regulars sat hunched over their drinks, muttering into their glasses. Behind the bar, wiping down a chipped counter, stood Earl Donnelly, a man whose ear was tuned to every secret Clearwater had to offer. Joseph approached without hesitation. Earl glanced up, one brow lifting in recognition. "Joe Reynolds," Earl drawled, tossing the rag over his shoulder. "Didn't expect to see you in here tonight. Thought you'd be home polishing rifles or teaching coyotes how to march." Joseph gave the ghost of a smile. "Need some answers, Earl?" Earl nodded toward the far end of the bar where it was quieter. Joseph followed, and when they were out of earshot of the other patrons, Earl leaned in. "Let me guess," Earl said, voice low. "This about those fake rangers been sniffing around?" Joseph didn't blink. "You hear about them?" "Whole town's buzzin'," Earl said. "You don't send a deputy racing past the diner in the middle of the lunch rush without folks starting to ask questions. Heard Boone and that big fella got picked up out your way." Joseph nodded once. "They're not acting alone." Earl leaned back against the bar, arms crossed, considering. "You're right about that. Word is, there's a fella been lurking on the outskirts. Fancy type, not the usual local trouble, suits, meetings in dark sedans, real cloak-and-dagger stuff. People who got no business in a town like ours." Joseph's gut tightened. "You got a name?" Earl scratched his chin. "Only thing I caught was Grayson. No first name, just Grayson. Been seen around the old rail yard, the abandoned strip past Mill Creek." Joseph filed that away instantly. Mill Creek had been dying for years, half the storefronts boarded up, the rest barely clinging on. Perfect spot for quiet deals and no witnesses. "You hear anything else?" Joseph pressed. Earl hesitated, then lowered his voice even more. Might be. Nothing. But rumor says Grayson's got ties to some big-money developers looking to buy up land on the cheap. Make life miserable enough for the holdouts, they figure folks'll sell for pennies." Joseph's jaw set like stone. The pieces were falling into place now, grim and predictable. It wasn't about a few fines. It was about taking land by force without having to use a bulldozer. Intimidation, pressure, staged legal trouble. Push hard enough and even stubborn ranchers could be broken. Except Joseph Reynolds wasn't built for breaking. He slid a folded 20 across the bar. Earl made it disappear without ceremony. "Appreciate it," Joseph said. "You planning on going out there tonight?" Earl asked. Joseph didn't answer. He didn't need to. Back in his truck, Joseph pointed the nose toward Mill Creek. The stars were sharp overhead, cutting through the blackness like tiny knives. The truck's headlights carved tunnels through the dark, and the road narrowed as he left town behind. Civilization bleeding away into dust and scrub and old, forgotten places. The rail yard came into view as little more than a sagging silhouette against the stars. Broken buildings, rusted tracks, old boxcars covered in graffiti. Joseph cut the engine a good distance away and continued on foot, moving with the same silent tread he once used in enemy villages halfway across the world. There were vehicles here, more than he expected. A cluster of SUVs, a black sedan, even a rental van with plates from another state. Faint light spilled from one of the old warehouse windows, casting long shadows. Joseph crouched behind an old fence post and watched. Inside, through a broken panel, he saw them. Men in suits, not ranchers, not locals, clean-cut, polished, out of place. They talked in hushed voices, passing folders back and forth, pointing at large maps spread across a table under the weak glow of a hanging bulb. Joseph strained to listen, catching bits and pieces. Final acquisitions. Refuse to sell. Pressure's not enough. Escalate, if necessary. The last phrase hardened something deep inside him. He slipped back toward his truck, unseen, mind racing. Grayson wasn't just some scam artist. He was running a coordinated operation, backed by serious money and power. And if Boone and Colt's failure didn't work, they were ready to push harder. Maybe even beyond intimidation. Joseph climbed into the cab, turned the key, and stared into the night. He couldn't beat this with muscle alone. He would need strategy, intelligence, precision, just like old times. As he pulled back onto the dark road heading for Clearwater, Joseph's face was grim, set like stone. The battle for his home was just beginning. And this time, Joseph Reynolds wasn't waiting for them to strike first. Joseph Reynolds sat at his kitchen table again, but this time there was no hesitation in his hands as he mapped out his next move. He spread a fresh sheet of paper across the wood, drawing clean lines with a pencil, circling key locations, writing names he knew and others he didn't. If they wanted a war for his land, they were about to find out what it meant to corner a man who had trained for wars far worse than this. He wasn't planning a defense anymore. Oh, he was planning a message. The next morning came fast. Joseph's phone buzzed before sunrise. Tommy Hendricks on the other end, voice tight with urgency. "Joe, they're moving heavy equipment. North Ridge. Looks like construction rigs. Sheriff said she's tied up on a burglary call 20 miles out." Joseph's knuckles tightened around the phone. "Copy. Keep eyes on him. Don't engage." Tommy hesitated. "Joe, they're on your side of the creek." Joseph's heart slowed to a deliberate, even beat. They weren't just posturing anymore. They were making their move. "I'll handle it," Joseph said and hung up. He went to the locker, pulling out the final piece of his kit. A battered, sand-colored tactical vest with stripped Velcro panels where the old unit patches had once been. He buckled it over his shirt, the familiar weight settling onto his shoulders like an old friend. He holstered his cig, tucked the radio onto his belt, and slid the keys into his pocket. Joseph wasn't dressing for intimidation. He was dressing for clarity, his own. He drove the F-150 fast across the ranch, the truck bouncing and rattling over the rough terrain. He cut across dry washes and grassy knolls, making for the North Ridge where Tommy had spotted the intruders. As he crested a hill, he saw them plain as day. A yellow bulldozer, 2 black trucks, half a dozen men in reflective vests pretending to be county workers. But Joseph knew better. None of the vehicles bore county insignias. None of the men moved like contractors. They moved like men who expected no one to challenge them. Joseph killed the engine and stepped out, slamming the door harder than necessary. Heads turned. Tools paused mid-air. The bulldozer's engine idled in a deep mechanical growl, but it didn't move. Joseph walked forward slowly, hands away from his body, empty but commanding. One of the men, short, with a thick neck and clipboard tucked under one arm, swaggered toward him. "Properties condemned," the man said without greeting. "Illegal structures. Emergency authorization to demolish." Joseph let the man's words spill into the dust between them. He didn't speak yet. He just kept walking until he stood a few feet away. "You got paperwork?" Joseph asked, voice low. The man blinked, caught off guard. "Already been filed." Joseph shook his head slowly. "That's not what I asked." Another man, bigger and meaner looking, shifted beside the dozer, resting his hand on something tucked under his vest. Joseph caught the motion but didn't react. "You're trespassing," Joseph said, voice calm, even. "You're in violation of state and federal law." Tickneck scoffed. "You gonna call the sheriff? She's busy." Joseph let a small smile tug at the corner of his mouth. "No, I'm not calling anyone." There was a moment of confusion among the workers. Glances exchanged, unease growing like a rising storm. "I already called them," came a new voice from behind. Sheriff Amanda Brooks rolled up in her cruiser, lights off, but her badge gleaming like a brand. She stepped out, her hand resting easily on her sidearm. "You boys must be real brave," Amanda said, strolling closer, "trying to steal a ranch from a war hero." Completely unconscious and bleeding, he thick-neck thankfully straightened. "We have authority." "You have nothing," Amanda snapped, cutting him off. "Not a permit, not a warrant, not a shred of paperwork that'll hold up for 5 seconds in front of a judge." She gestured toward the bulldozer. "Shut it down. Step away." The man hesitated, caught between pride and common sense. Behind Joseph, another set of engines rumbled up. The rest of the local ranchers, men and women Joseph had lived alongside for years, pulling in with dusty pickups and old hunting rifles racked behind their seats. Tommy climbed out of the lead truck, tipping his hat back with a smirk. "Looks like you stirred up a hornet's nest, Joe." Joseph didn't smile, but there was a glint of quiet satisfaction in his eyes. The fake workers stood frozen, realizing too late they were badly outnumbered and completely exposed. Amanda walked forward, reaching for her cuffs. "This is your final warning. Kneel down, hands on your heads." The dozer operator killed the engine. The growl of the machine sputtered out into a defeated silence. One by one, the men dropped to their knees. Amanda and her deputies, arriving seconds later with dust still trailing them, moved in fast, zip-tying wrists and securing weapons. It wasn't a fight, it was a rout. Joseph stood back, watching it unfold with a detached calm. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to raise a hand. His community, his home, had done what it always did when pushed too far. It pushed back harder. As Amanda herded the prisoners toward the cruisers, she stopped next to Joseph. "Grayson's not here," she said grimly, "but we got enough to bring in some serious heat on him. Interstate fraud, conspiracy, you name it." Joseph nodded once. "Good." Amanda hesitated. "Joe, thank you." Joseph looked over the land, the battered bulldozer, the ranchers standing like sentinels against the coming night. "It wasn't just me," he said, simply. Amanda gave a small, tired smile. "You lit the match, though." Joseph watched as the last cruiser pulled away, the setting sun bleeding red and gold across the hills. He stood alone for a moment longer, breathing in the dry air, feeling the dust settle around him. The battle had been won. But Joseph Reynolds knew vigilance wasn't a habit you turned off. It was a way of life. And if the world thought it could forget men like him, quiet men, steadfast men, men who had fought for peace only to find new wars waiting, they were dead wrong. For his home, and he would defend it. A week later, the ranch was alive with the kind of quiet celebration that only a place like Clearwater County could understand. There were no parades, no flashing cameras, no news crews desperate for a story. Just trucks pulled onto the open fields, picnic tables laid out under the wide sky, and the people who had fought for something bigger than themselves gathered together in the fading warmth of a golden afternoon. Joseph Reynolds moved through the small crowd, nodding to neighbors he'd known for years and others he barely spoke to until the trouble had come to their doorsteps. Now those old lines were gone, burned away by the simple truth that when it mattered, they stood together. Men like Roy Higgins from the feed store, who hadn't said more than 2 words to Joseph in a year, clapped him on the shoulder. Emil Lou, who ran the diner, handed him a slice of pecan pie wrapped in wax paper without saying a thing, just smiling wide enough to crinkle her sun-weathered face. Sheriff Amanda Brooks stood near the edge of the gathering, sipping from a red plastic cup, her stance relaxed in a way Joseph hadn't seen in months. She caught his eye and raised the cup slightly in a silent toast. Joseph tipped his hat in return. The last week had been a blur. After the arrests on the North Ridge, Amanda and her deputies, backed by state investigators, dug deep into Grayson's operation. The false ranger ring was just the surface. Beneath it, they found fraudulent land deeds, intimidation campaigns, and bribed inspectors, all meant to drive ranchers off their land and into the hands of developers who saw the valley as nothing more than future resort property. But thanks to the evidence gathered, thanks to Boone and Colt's loose tongues in custody, Grayson had been arrested 2 days ago trying to board a private jet out of Santa Fe. Charged with a stack of felonies that would bury him for decades, he wouldn't be coming back to Clearwater County or anywhere else. Joseph leaned against the side of his truck, watching Tommy Hendricks wrestle a stubborn grill lid onto a smoker that billowed sweet, smoky smells across the field. Kids chased each other around the legs of pickup trucks, dogs barked, and old folks set up folding chairs under the trees. The normalcy of it all, so hard-fought and fragile, settled deep into Joseph's chest. He didn't seek out moments like this. He never had. But now that it was here, he let himself feel it. The way the land seemed to breathe easier. The way people looked each other in the eye a little more readily. The way laughter, true laughter, rose into the sky and scattered among the stars, beginning to peek out overhead. Joseph turned as he heard boots crunching behind him. It was Amanda, a second cup in hand. "Brought you a refill?" she said, offering it over. He accepted it with a small smile. Appreciated. Amanda leaned her hip against the truck beside him, looking out over the gathering. "You know," she said after a moment, "most folks would have folded, sold off their land, moved to town. Couldn't save yourself a lot of trouble." Joseph took a sip, the sweet tea cooling his throat. "Not really in my nature," he said. Amanda chuckled softly. "No? Guess it's not." They stood in companionable silence, the kind that didn't need filling. "You gave people hope, Joe," she said finally, voice low and sincere. "You didn't just save your ranch. You reminded all of us why we fight to stay here." Joseph shook his head slightly. "Pas cordaus. Paul Raymond." Amanda smiled. "No. But someone had to be first. Someone had to stand when it was easier to sit." He didn't answer. He just watched the stars as they thickened overhead, pinpricks of light strung across the endless black. After a while, Amanda patted his shoulder and walked back toward the crowd. Joseph stayed where he was, letting the night soak into him, the simple sounds of community filling the spaces where loneliness once might have lived. Later, after most folks had drifted home and only the diehards remained swapping stories around a campfire, Tommy pulled up a chair next to Joseph. "Do you ever think about what's next?" Tommy asked, poking at the fire with a long stick. Joseph considered the question, rolling it around in his mind. "I reckon I'll do what I've always done," he said finally. "Fix the fence when it breaks, chase off coyotes when they get too bold, plant a little more, hunt a little less." Tommy grinned. "That sounds about right." Joseph tilted his head back, gazing up at the stars. "A bit I'll keep watch," he added quietly. "Make sure this place stays the way it's supposed to be." Tommy nodded, understanding in the simple way of men who had seen enough to know that vigilance wasn't a choice, it was a duty. The fire crackled between them, embers rising into the cool air, dancing like tiny spirits freed from the earth. Across the field, Joseph could still hear the faint sounds of music. A battered guitar, An old country song, half sung, half laughed through by men and women who had earned the right to laugh without fear. The land was safe tonight, the people were safe, and Joseph Reynolds, who had once fought in foreign sands and distant cities, had found his battlefield here, in the quiet spaces of home, and won a victory not just for himself, but for every soul who called Clearwater County theirs. He let his eyes close for a moment, breathing it in. The ranch, the stars, the fire, and the knowledge that some things, honor, courage, home, were still worth standing for. They always would be.